Hi there, I'm Tim Autrey, and welcome to Principle Based Performance Improvement, where we combine timeless wisdom with modern science and practical tools to help you move yourself and your organization toward better, safer, and more productive outcomes.
So one of the big questions is, how in the heck do we transform culture? I've already mentioned that inside of an organization, culture change or culture transformation is not hard, it does not take a long time, and by the time you work your way through Module 8, you're going to absolutely agree with me. You're going to know precisely how to do it. Where does it come from? How does it actually happen? And the reason we need to do that is because there are two predominant schools of thought out there. Everybody has their take on how to do this, and they generally fall into one of two camps. The first school of thought is culture change or culture transformation has to come from the top down. You got to have charismatic leaders, you got to have vision, you got to have people that drive this thing. That's one of the predominant schools of thought. The other predominant school of thought is, no, what you do is you find out who your natural key influencers are in your organization, and you grow this from the bottom up. You get those people charged up, they become role models for everybody else, everybody wants to be like them, and you grow this from the bottom up. So what do you think? Top down or bottom up? Well, when you think about it in those terms, the truth is you need both. You've got to have a leadership team that has vision, that is providing a common message that's win-win, and that is consistent between their words and their actions. Okay? Consistent between their words and their actions over the long term, especially when times get tough. You got to have that. It's a must. On the other hand, you also need to have those folks out there on the front line who have a lot of influence on other people. You've got to have them aligned with this vision and supporting it and role modeling the behaviors you want to see in other people. So then neither one of those schools all by itself is correct. Top down, bottom up, you need to have both. But neither one of those is really the answer, because culture transformation actually comes from the inside out. That's the way you need to do it. So now you may be asking, okay, that's great. How the heck do we get there? Now we're going to dive into the how do we do this? And depending upon your level and your station in your organization, this is probably one of the things that you are most anxious to get into. And to begin, I'd like to say, there are myths out there now about transforming culture. And the two predominant ones are, changing culture is hard and it takes a long time. Well, I got to tell you, that's absolutely not true. I am telling you this based upon our past almost 16 years of experience and what we have seen transpire when teams and organizations properly do the stuff we've been talking about in this masterclass. Changing culture is not hard, and it does not take a long time. And you may or may not have noticed, I don't like talking about culture change. I like talking about culture transformation, because change can be incremental and iterative, and that ain't good enough in today's environment. We're talking about wholehearted transformation in a very short period of time. How do we do this? Well, I want to go way back in history and use a story to illustrate how this happens. So what you're seeing now is a picture of a cupbearer to a king. The king's name was Artaxerxes. The cupbearer's name is Nehemiah. And this is a story from the 5th century BC. So Nehemiah was born in Jerusalem, and he ended up wherever King Artaxerxes was, I'm not sure, but he ended up there as his cupbearer. Now, not a high-level position by any stretch. During this period of time, in the 5th century BC, the walls of Jerusalem were crumbling down, and for some reason, Nehemiah felt very strongly that he needed to go help rebuild those things. He felt horrible that his hometown, his city had gotten into such shambles. And one of the reasons this was so important back then, they had walls around most things, is because there were marauding forces and people that wanted to rape and pillage and all that kind of stuff. And those walls were very, very important. So he positioned the king to let him go orchestrate the rebuilding of those walls. So what the king provided him with was a letter of safe passage. So Nehemiah leaves where he was, travels to Jerusalem, Now, he did not have an army to protect him. He did not have a huge budget. He did not have warehouses full of supplies. He gets to Jerusalem, finds out that the walls are indeed in shambles, and he orchestrates a plan to rebuild the walls. 52 days later, the walls of Jerusalem were rebuilt, and some of the walls that were done back then are still part of the foundation of the walls that exist today. 52 days without a budget, without a warehouse full of supplies, and without an army to protect the workers while they're working. How in the world did he do this? Well, he employed a very sound principle. And quite simply, what he did was he got the residents of Jerusalem to help build that portion of the wall directly in front of their homes. Do you think they were motivated? Of course they were, because they knew if the walls in front of their homes were not sound, they were going to be some of the first people to get wiped out should enemies come through the wall. So they were highly motivated. So he had ownership, he had engagement, he was able to achieve motivation, and they got it done in 52 days. Unfrickin' believable in my mind. That is the power of keeping things close to home. Now let's talk real quickly about how we generally launch enterprise-wide or corporate-wide initiatives if we want to take performance from where it is to where we want to go. Of course, the vision has to be at the top, role modeling, support, and nurturing has to be at the top, but where does it actually happen? This is where we mess it up. So we'll get an executive committee or a team of volunteers will come to corporate and they'll lock themselves in a room and they'll come up with some bullet points of here's how we're going to conduct ourselves going forward, and you'll print up posters and all these kinds of things and you'll distribute them throughout the entire organization, and they have wonderful stuff on them. They were well-intentioned, and the folks that were on that team that helped put those things together, they're excited, they're energized, they're jazzed, man, they are pumped. But how does everybody else feel about it? Blah, 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 blah. You see, because they didn't help create it, they don't own it. That's a fundamentally important thing to understand about this whole code of honor process. So real quickly, back to the story of Nehemiah, because these folks were rebuilding the section of the wall right in front of their houses, man, they had ownership. Well, how can we get that kind of ownership in an organization? Well, let's talk about this. So the whole concept of culture change is hard and takes a long time is because mostly it's thought of as the whole organization. Let's say you're running an organization of 28,000 people. You think about transforming the culture of 28,000 people, it's overwhelming. It's like, how the heck are we going to do this? Now, I also want to step back for one moment and say, in our experience in PPI, we have been able to prove that transforming culture is not hard and it doesn't take a long time. We are talking about doing it within an organization. If you want to talk about transforming the culture of a country or of an ethnicity or of a religion, oh my goodness, that's an entirely different thing. However, inside our organizations, because we have a reason, we have a purpose to exist that, when properly communicated, we can rally behind, purpose, autonomy, mastery at the individual level, then we are aligning on a day-to-day basis to our core principles. It all fits together. All we need now is we need a conduit and a mechanism to put feet to this at what we call the natural work team level. So the metaphor that we're using here is, if you think about transforming the culture of an entire organization, and it can be a plant of 100 people, 500 people, all the way out to an enterprise of 28, 50, 75,000 people, whatever it happens to be, you're thinking about, the metaphor that I like to use for this is, it's like attempting to turn an oil tanker out in the middle of the ocean. If you have an oil tanker out in the middle of the ocean and you want to negotiate a 90-degree turn either to port or to starboard, how far does that oil tanker need to travel in order to negotiate a 90-degree turn at normal cruising speed? Based upon the tanker and the load and everything else, it's somewhere between 2 and 4 nautical miles. So think about that. A simple 90-degree turn, normal cruising speed, 2 to 4 nautical miles of travel, long distance, lots of energy, significant amount of time. When we think about transforming the culture of an entire organization, or even just a plant of 100 people, it's like trying to turn that oil tanker. Therefore, it's overwhelming. And this is why that whole concept of it's hard, it takes a long time has been allowed to continue to exist. So then I want to ask you another question. Let's say we have another nautical vessel, in this case a speedboat. Now we got that speedboat going along at normal cruising speed. How far does that speedboat need to travel in order to negotiate a 90-degree turn to either port or starboard? Well, a speedboat can flip its rear end around and negotiate a turn almost instantaneously, correct? So what the Code of Honor process does is it transforms the oil tanker into a fleet of speedboats, each one of which is capable of shifting its direction almost instantaneously. Now, what are these speedboats within organizations? These are what we call natural work teams. What's a natural work team? A natural work team is a team of people that work together regularly, and they typically have a supervisor. The supervisor does not mean frontline supervisor by title necessarily, who's ever the head of the team. So then when you think about your organization, you can now likely think about, okay, we've got an organization of 150 people at my facility, and when I think about the natural work teams, we have around 15 of them, maybe 17 of them, and that would be about right, okay? So then what you do is you go through this Code of Honor facilitation process with each one of those teams individually, and I'll talk about the process here in a bit. But before I do that, I want to get back to another point. So now we've talked about each of these speedboats being capable of changing its direction virtually instantaneously. So now if you visualize your organization of 15 to 17 speedboats, and you're perfectly aligned to get the results you're getting, you are at least going along basically in the same direction, and now these speedboats start turning, how do we know they're all going to turn in the same direction? Because if you got speedboats turning in different directions, you got a mell of a hess, right? You have a bigger problem than you started with. Well, that's where the underlying brilliance of this whole Code of Honor process comes into play.
If you're finding these insights helpful, please share them with your friends and colleagues. Help your search engine find more content like this for you by hitting the like button before you leave. And if these PPI messages resonate with you, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next one. Until next time, my friend, be safe, stay humble, and make a difference.